the late 19th century, the landscape of Africa was about to change forever. European powers gathered in Berlin were about to carve up an entire continent with nothing more than maps and pens. The year was 1884, and in a grand conference room in Berlin, far from the African shores, representatives from various European nations sat around a table, deciding the fate of millions. Among them were the Germans, newcomers into the colonial game, but eager to establish their place in what would become known as the scramble for Africa. What these men in their fine suits couldn't possibly imagine was that their decision would lead to one of the most significant acts of resistance in East African history, the Maji Maji Rebellion. This is not just a story of colonial oppression, it's a tale of courage, unity, and the indomitable spirit of people fighting for their freedom. In 1884, the most powerful nations in Europe gathered in Berlin for what would become known as the Berlin Conference. In elegant rooms far removed from African soil, men in formal attire drew lines across maps, dividing an entire continent among themselves. They had one goal: to establish rules for the colonization of Africa. Among these nations was Germany, a latecomer to the colonial race but eager to prove itself as an imperial power. When the conference ended in 1885, Germany had laid claim to a vast territory in East Africa, modern-day Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. This would become German East Africa, a jewel in the young empire's colonial crown. The Germans had arrived with grand ambitions and the belief that they could transform this vast territory into a profitable colony. But they would soon learn that the people of East Africa had other plans. The story of German colonization begins with an ambitious and ruthless man named Karl Peters. In 1884, Peters arrived on the East African coast with the backing of the German East African Company. He carried with him what he claimed were treaties, documents that would give Germany control over vast territories. But these treaties were nothing more than coerced agreements with local leaders who often couldn't even read what they were signing. The local people already had sophisticated societies, with the coastal regions influenced by centuries of Islamic culture and trade. Inland, various ethnic groups had their own systems of governance, their own traditions, and their own ways of life. But Peters and his company saw only resources to be exploited. Initially, the German East African Company attempted to administer the territory, but they faced fierce resistance. The Abushiri Revolt of 1888 to 1889 showed the first signs of organized opposition to German rule. This rebellion, led by Abushiri ibn Salim al-Arfi, united coastal Arabs and the local African natives against the Germans. Though they were ultimately defeated, it was a precursor of what was to come. By 1891, the German government had seen enough. The trading company's failure led to direct imperial rule. They sent in a wicked man, Colonel Hermann von Wissmann, backed by a force of German officers and renegade African soldiers known as Askaris. The new colonizers brought with them something the local people had never experienced before: a system of rigid control and exploitation that would transform their lives forever. They demanded forced labor for road construction and other projects. The Germans also appointed renegade Arab and African administrators called Akidas, who often abused their power, creating another layer of oppression. But perhaps most devastating of all, they introduced a cotton cultivation system that would push the people to their breaking point. In 1902, Governor Gustav Adolf von Gotzen made a decision that would change everything. He ordered several villages to grow cotton for export. Many under the threat of execution fulfilled these commands, as each community had to meet strict quotas, regardless of whether the land was suitable for cotton cultivation or not. The system was pure evil. Each village had to establish a cotton plot under the supervision of local headmen. Workers were required to labor for a fixed number of days on these communal plots. The German authority claimed this would bring prosperity, but the reality was a very different outcome. The local headmen were put in charge of overseeing production, creating deep tension within communities. These headmen found themselves caught between German demands and their own people's suffering. Some became tools of oppression themselves, while others secretly sympathized with the growing resistance. But the Germans had made a crucial mistake. They had failed to understand the caliber of the people they were dealing with, proud peoples who had governed themselves for generations. The Matombi, the Njendo, the Yao, and many others had their own systems of governance, their own ways of life. As one Matombi elder would later say, "We who have for so long been used to govern ourselves find laws of these Germans very hard, especially the taxes, because we natives have no money. Our wealth consists of millet, maize, oil, and groundnuts." The stage was set for what would become one of the most significant acts of resistance in East African history. The people had endured the Abushiri revolt, witnessed the Maji Maji Rebellion of 1891 to 1898, and now they were about to write their own chapter in the struggle against colonial oppression. They would soon show the Germans that treaties signed under duress and illicit governance imposed by force could never fully subjugate them without a fight. In 1904, as the pressure of German colonial rule reached its peak, a remarkable figure emerged in the region. His name was Kinjekitile Ngwale, a spiritual leader who would become known as Bokero. He claimed to be possessed by a snake spirit called Ongo, and his message would spark a fire of resistance that would spread across the land. Kinjekitile began speaking of a powerful medicine, a water mixture that would protect warriors from German bullets. This Maji, the Swahili word for water, was mixed with castor oil and millet seeds. But it was more than just water. It was a symbol of unity, a call to resistance that transcended tribal boundaries. Word of the magical water spread through secret communication called Nkiaila. People began traveling from far and wide to receive the medicine. Kinjekitile's message was clear. The time had come to unite against German oppression. By July 1905, the patience of the Matombi people had reached its breaking point. The cotton fields, symbols of their oppression, stood ripe for harvest. But these fields would never yield their crop for the German colonizers. On July 31st, 1905, the Matombi made their decisive move. Armed with spears and arrows, they marched on Samanga. Their target wasn't the German soldiers or officials, it was the cotton. They tore up the plants root by stem, destroying the very symbol of their enslavement, likely to send a message to those wicked oppressors that their iniquity would soon end. The trading post, another marker of colonial control, was pummeled to the ground. These initial events gave hope to the native cause, fueling the desire to berate the sacred land of these strange colonials. The Germans' response was swift and brutal. Kinjekitile, the spiritual leader who had given hope to so many, was arrested and hanged for treason on August 4th. But before his execution, he made a proclamation that would echo across the region. The Maji, the sacred water of resistance, had already spread far and wide, reaching as far as Kilosa and Mahenge. What began as a localized uprising quickly transformed into something the Germans had never anticipated, a unified resistance from a multitude of tribes. It was the separation between natives that the colonial depended on to divide and conquer the land. The fear of unified revolt sent shockwaves through the naive foreigners. The Njindo people soon joined the rebellion. Then came the Yao, communities that had historically been separate by language, culture, and tradition were now united in a common cause: freedom from colonial oppression. On August 14, 1905, Njindo warriors attacked a group of conformist missionaries on a safari. Among the dead was Bishop Spies of Dar es Salaam. The next day, rebels captured a German post at Lewale, 100 miles away. The message was clear. This was no mere local disturbance. The rebellion spread like wildfire across the southern regions. Warriors from different tribes, all believing in the protective power of the Maji, launched attacks on German garrisons. They moved with a confidence that unnerved their opponents, advancing fearlessly against modern weapons, convinced that German bullets would turn to water. August 25, 1905, marked one of the most dramatic confrontations of the rebellion. Several thousand Maji warriors converged on the German cantonment at Mahenge. Defending the fort was Lieutenant Theodor von Assel, commanding just 60 native soldiers and a few hundred loyal tribesmen. His greatest advantage, 2 machine guns. The attacking force was massive, but they faced a critical challenge. 2 tribal groups disagreed on the timing of the attack, a discord that would prove costly. The first wave advanced toward the German position, believing fully in the protection of the Maji. Von Assel's men opened fire from 1,000 meters. The warriors stood their ground, their faith in the Maji unshaken. For 15 long minutes, they held firm under the devastating fire before finally breaking ranks and regrouping. But the battle wasn't over. A second column of 1,200 warriors approached from the east. Some managed to get within 3 paces of the German firing line before falling. Their bravery was extraordinary. Their bodily sacrifice was immense. In October 1905, the rebellion received powerful new allies. The Ngoni people, descendants of a proud warrior tradition dating back to the great Zulu kingdoms, decided to join the uprising. They brought with them 5,000 fighters, experienced in strategic close combat warfare and eager to drive out the wicked foreigners. The Ngoni were different from many other participants in the rebellion. They had a recent history of military prowess, having arrived in the region as part of a great migration from the south. Their decision to join the rebellion marked a crucial moment. The resistance now had the support of one of the most formidable military forces in East Africa. But the Germans had also been preparing. Governor von Goetzen had requested reinforcements from Berlin, and Kaiser Wilhelm II had responded by sending 2 cruisers with the marine complements. More troops arrived from as far away as New Guinea. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation. On October 21, 1905, German troops armed with machine guns marched from Mahenge toward the Ngoni camp. What followed would shake the very foundation of the rebellion's spiritual strength. As the German forces advanced, the Ngoni warriors began to retreat. But this wasn't just any retreat. It was a moment of profound disillusionment. Warriors were seen throwing away the bottles of war medicine, beginning to doubt the ability of the Maji. They cried out, "The Maji is a lie." The protective water that had given so many the courage to stand against bullets had failed to deliver its promised protection. But to view this moment as merely the failure of a spiritual belief would be to miss the deeper significance of what the Magi represented. It wasn't just about magical protection. It was about unity, about the courage to stand against oppression, about the dream of freedom. Governor von Goetzen, now with reinforcements at his disposal, launched a campaign that would be remembered for its ruthlessness. The German strategy was simple but devastating. Destroy everything that could sustain the rebellion. 3 columns of German troops moved into the rebellious south. They didn't just fight warriors, they destroyed villages, burned crops, and destroyed food storage. This wasn't just warfare. It was a deliberate attempt to break the spirit of resistance through starvation and suffering of the innocent. Captain Wangenheim, one of the German commanders, wrote to von Goetzen, "Only hunger and desire of necessities can bring about a final submission. Military actions alone will remain more or less a drop in the ocean." These words would prove prophetic in the most tragic way possible. Despite facing overwhelming odds, the resistance continued. In the southwest, the Bena people managed to successfully ambush a German column crossing the Rufiji River. This victory kept the flame of rebellion alive, proving that even against superior weaponry, the native spirit could prevail. Lieutenant Gustav von Blumenthal, leading a small force of Europeans and 46 Askaris, found himself under constant attack as he marched from Songea to Mahenge in early May 1906. The natives, though outgunned, showed remarkable tactical skill, harassing the German forces at every opportunity. As 1906 drew to a close, the rebellion began to transform into a guerrilla war. But this transformation came at a terrible cost. The German scorched earth policy had succeeded in creating a devastating famine that would be remembered as the Great Hunger, ukame. The numbers tell a story of immense human suffering. By the time the last embers of rebellion were extinguished in August 1907, the toll was staggering. 15 Germans and 389 of their soldiers had fallen. But for the people of East Africa, the cost was almost beyond comprehension. Over 75,000 people perished, many from the deliberately induced famine. The Maji Maji Rebellion wasn't the first act of resistance against German colonial rule. It had been preceded by the Abushiri Revolt of 1888 to 1889 and the Waye Rebellion of 1891 to 1898. Each of these uprisings represented a step in the long journey toward freedom. What made the Maji Maji Rebellion different was its scale and tribal unity. For the first time, people who had lived separately for generations, the Matumbi, the Anjindo, the Yao, the Ngoni, and many others, came together under a common cause. They put their differences to the side to fight for something larger than themselves. The aftermath of the rebellion changed the landscape of southern Tanzania forever. Journalist John Gunther, writing in 1953, noted that even half a century later, the region remained a Cinderella province, never fully recovering from the German response to the uprising. But the spirit of resistance lived on. When Tanzania fought for its independence in the 20th century, the memory of the Maji Maji fighters served as an inspiration. The rebellion became a symbol of Tanzania's first unified struggle against colonial oppression. Their weapons may have been simple: spears against machine guns, arrows against rifles. Their courage was immeasurable. It also showcased the cowardice of this wicked foreigner who unjustly encroached them for selfish financial gain. These mighty natives dared to dream of sovereignty in the emergence of wicked colonial empires, to stand up to one of the most immoral nations on earth. The story of the Maji Maji Rebellion isn't just about defeat. It's about the enduring native spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. It's about people who chose to fight rather than submit, who believed in the possibility of freedom, even when it seemed impossible. In the end, the rebellion did what its leaders hoped. It united people across boundaries, created a shared identity in resistance, and laid the groundwork for future generations who would continue the fight for independence. The Maji may or may not have turned bullets into water, but it did something perhaps even more powerful. It turned separate tribes into one people, united in their struggle for freedom.